Throughout history, humanity has wrestled with one unavoidable truth: the passage of time. Some embrace it, others fear it. Elizabeth Bathory's obsession with preserving her youth, her desperate quest to escape the ravages of time, reflects a fear that continues to exist in our world today. Known as gerascophobia, the fear of aging drives people not to cruelty, but to anxiety, panic, and even self-destruction. This fear, while not always as extreme as Bathory's, is something many experience. In the remote hills of present-day Slovakia, the crumbling ruins of Čaktich Castle still stand. Once a fortress of power and wealth, it is now a decaying reminder of one of history's darkest figures, the woman who would become known as the Blood Countess. Born into the powerful House of Bathory in 1560, Elizabeth was destined for nobility. Her family ruled over vast lands in Hungary and Transylvania. Her cousins held titles of kings and princes, and she herself married Count Feron Nadasti at the age of 15. Beneath the wealth, a darkness festered. Elizabeth was not like other noblewomen. From an early age, she witnessed the brutal punishment of servants, routine for the time. But rumors circulated of a more personal cruelty. Stories spread of young Elizabeth's violent outbursts, her delight in tormenting those weaker than her, and it would only get worse.
She is the ultimate mysterious character who is the starring role in her own story.
In 1604, Count Nadasti, the formidable warrior, died, leaving Elizabeth in control of vast estates and hundreds of servants. With his death, her power grew unchecked, and soon, so did the rumors. Peasants whispered of strange cries from within the castle walls. Disappearances began to mount. At the age of 11, Bathory, who was considered a beautiful and well-educated girl, became engaged to Count Ferenc Nadasdy. Some accounts of her life include her giving birth to an illegitimate child, fathered by another man, before her marriage. A 15-year-old Bathory married Nadasdy on May 8, 1575. The couple's first child was born 10 years later, in 1585. Bathory gave birth to 5 children. 2 died as infants, but 2 daughters and a son survived. As her husband was a soldier who was often off fighting Ottoman Turks, the couple spent most of their marriage apart. However, he may have schooled her in techniques of torture. After Nadasdy died in January 1604, Bathory took control of her extensive estates. What could drive a woman of such privilege to such unimaginable cruelty? Some believed she was driven by madness. Others spoke of sorcery. Elizabeth Bathory feared the one thing that none could escape: time. She watched helplessly as her youth began to fade, and in her desperation to hold on to it, the legend of the Blood Countess was born. Soon, servants were no longer safe. Young girls from the villages disappeared, never to be seen again. Blood began to spill behind the castle walls. Bathory was accused of a haunting litany of crimes against both female servants and minor noblewomen who'd come to her for training and education. Most of her alleged assaults and murders took place after she was widowed in 1604. Some of Bathory's victims were covered with honey and left outside for insects to devour. During colder parts of the year, young women might be stripped naked and forced into deadly ice baths. Bathory sometimes tortured girls by driving needles into their fingers, cutting their noses or lips, or whipping them with stinging nettles. She would bite shoulders and breasts, as well as burning the flesh, including the genitals, of some victims.
She took the jaw of a girl and she just ripped it open with her hands.
The intimate nature of Bathory's attacks suggests a sexual motivation, though it's impossible to know with certainty what compelled her to act. Depictions of Bathory often mention her bathing in the blood of virgin victims in an attempt to recapture her lost youth. However, this depraved action isn't backed up by contemporaneous witness accounts. The first mention of Bathory's blood baths came 100 years after her death. What was once a noble estate became a house of nightmares. Elizabeth Bathory's cruelty was no longer hidden, but it was far from ordinary obsession. What began as rage-fueled outbursts against her servants soon grew into something far darker. But Elizabeth Bathory did not act alone. Her brutality was aided by a loyal inner circle. Trusted servants who enabled and facilitated her unspeakable crimes among them. Was her nursemaid, Anna Darvulia, who is believed to have been behind these walls. Whispers became screams. It was said that Darvulia introduced Elizabeth to the dark arts, teaching her methods of torture that were as cruel as they were inventive. Together, they devised elaborate ways to make their victims suffer. Girls were stripped, beaten, their flesh pierced with needles and their blood drained for what Elizabeth believed were its restorative powers. As Elizabeth's cruelty grew, so did her need for accomplices. In addition to Darvulia, 3 other trusted servants became notorious for aiding her in her crimes. Ilona Jo, Dorothea Sentes, and a man named Janos Uivari, also known as Fichko, carried out Elizabeth's orders with ruthless efficiency. It was Ilona Jo, a washerwoman, and Dorothea Sentes, an older woman often described as a witch, who would drag the young girls into the torture chambers, holding them down while Elizabeth carried out her horrifying acts. Meanwhile, Fichko, the youngest of her servants, was tasked with the gruesome task of disposing of the bodies, often burying them in shallow graves surrounding the castle. Each day, the castle saw new victims brought in, often under the guise of employment or education. Once inside, they faced unimaginable horror. One servant described a victim having her fingers slowly burned off while still alive. Another was said to have been forced into an ice bath and left to freeze. Elizabeth's need for blood seemed insatiable. Some believe it was her obsession with preserving her youth that drove her to drain the blood of young girls, in the belief that bathing in it could restore her fading beauty. Her accomplices were more than willing to help her, as they believed their loyalty would grant them power and protection. For years, the horrors inside Choctich Castle were nothing more than whispers, distant rumors too terrible to be believed. But as more young girls vanished, the truth became undeniable. Elizabeth Bathory's reign of terror could no longer be ignored. In 1610, King Matthias II of Hungary took action. He appointed György Thurso, the Palatine of Hungary, to investigate the unsettling claims surrounding the Countess. He was responsible for the judicial matters in the country. What Thurso found would send shockwaves through the region. On a cold December morning, Thurso and his men arrived unannounced at Choctich Castle. They were met with a sight that would haunt them forever. It is said that they caught Elizabeth in the act of torturing a young girl. Thurso's investigation uncovered a house of horrors. Over 80 bodies were discovered scattered across the castle grounds and hidden within its walls. Witnesses spoke of unimaginable cruelty, testifying to the torture and murder of hundreds of young women, perhaps as many as 600. Each had played a key role in the torture and murder of innocent girls. Jo and Sentes, in particular, were known for dragging victims to their deaths, while Ujvari disposed of their bodies. Their punishment was as brutal as their crimes. Ilona Jo and Dorothea Sentes were sentenced to have their fingers torn off with hot irons before being burned alive. Janos Uivari, the youngest, was beheaded. It was a swift end to the monstrous inner circle. After these executions, Thurso continued to investigate the Countess. One witness stated that Bathory herself had listed 650 victims in her papers, though the number of victims varied in other testimonials, and the Countess' exact death toll remains unknown. The evidence gathered by Thurso also included 289 witness statements. And what of Elizabeth Bathory? The Blood Countess, spared from public trial due to her noble status, was sentenced to a different fate. She was confined to a single room in her castle, walled off from the outside world, left to face her own demons in isolation. In 1602, a priest wrote a letter that discussed the excessive cruelty exhibited by Bathory and her husband towards their servants. The testimony against Bathory could have included true tales about how harshly she acted with lower classes. For 4 years, She remained in that darkened room until her death in 1614. Elizatbeth Bathory, once feared across the land, died alone, her reign of terror finally over. The body of a 54-year-old Bathory was found on August 21, 1614, in Castle Chaktice, located in present-day Slovakia, where she'd been imprisoned since 1610. She was initially buried in the crypt on her estate, but her body was likely moved afterward. The quest to hold on to youth has not faded with time, it has simply taken on new forms. According to Dr. Catherine Shear, gerascophobia, the fear of aging, while rare, can distort one's sense of reality. It's not just a fear of wrinkles or gray hair, but a deeper terror of mortality, of losing one's place in the world. But perhaps this is also a cautionary tale, one that reminds us of the dangers of letting fear or an unchecked phobia take control. Whether in the past or in the present, the fear of aging can consume us if we let it. Do subscribe till then, viewers. Stay safe and stay curious.